You guys see my screen?
Yes, sir, I can.
Looks good.
All right, we'll get started then. So yeah, like Chrissy mentioned, I'm definitely into Dotfiles. Something I'm pretty passionate about. So yep. All right. Yeah. So like Chris said, I'm Clayton Parker. Most people call me Claytron, either on the internet or in real life. And I have a link to my Dotfiles, and I'll get these slides up somewhere so you all can get the links and everything. My Dotfiles are up on GitHub. They've been up there for since like 2008, I think. It's actually how I learned how to use Git in GitHub. Was posting my Dotfiles there. At the time, they were a Subversion repository that was using SVN to Git to actually push them up there. So I learned a lot of pain of Git that way, which is fun. So yeah. So why would we want to configure our Dotfiles? I mean, probably the biggest thing is personalization. Everyone has their own way of doing things, so Dotfiles give you a way to do that. It's also a way to save settings or configuration for tools you use a lot, and in general, just trying to make your life easier and supposedly more productive. So before we dive in too deep, wanted to show off, just what a stock shell looks like. So this is the terminal on Mac OS X without any customizations. And so if we just go in here and I do an ls on my Dotfiles without actually using them, it looks pretty plain Jane. It's kind of boring. But then if we go and start actually configuring everything, we can turn it into a much more exciting thing. So here, I've changed a lot of things. For one, I actually use a different terminal. I use a terminal called Kitty. So Kitty allows me to use the same terminal on OS X and on Linux. I think maybe Windows. I haven't actually tried that. But yeah, so I have a different terminal. I have changed the color scheme. So I typically prefer to use Solarize. So I use Solarize Light here. I obviously customize my prompt. I've customized ls to show me more information. I've actually have syntax highlighting on my command line, which sounds insane, but it's something that I've really grown accustomed to and is really nice. And then typically I'm running inside of Tmux as well. So so going from the stock shell, which just has your computer name in the prompt and nothing else really going on, to a full-on like customized terminal, things we want to do with our Dotfiles. And so when I was writing this talk, I use Vim. So I was writing all this stuff inside of Vim, inside of my terminal, and on Linux. So now those other examples were from Mac OS, but this is actually me doing this on my Linux machine. So it's kind of one of the reasons you want to customize those things in Dotfiles so you can actually port them to different machines. So yeah, when you go to actually start customizing things, you probably want to pick a shell. I've used ZSH for, probably 17 years, I guess now. My brother basically was like, here's ZSH and Vim, and I kind of ran with it. And those are like power tools. So he's basically handed me a chainsaw to go carve a stick or something. So I kind of jumped right in and started figuring things out. And before long, I was modifying my configuration and making things more focused on what I wanted to do. So there's a lot of options out there for a shell. I believe there's even shells written in Python. I know there's one written in Ruby. There's all kinds of like weird versions of a shell. Probably the two most popular would be Bash or ZSH. The one that's kind of picked up a lot of steam is Fish. So Fish is so if Bash is sort of your stock shell, ZSH is like supercharged Bash, and then Fish is like supercharged ZSH. But it also has a very different um, setup language and everything. So whereas Bash and ZSH are very close to each other, Fish is a lot different. So when picking a shell to start out with, if you haven't already, um, the caveat is that Fish may be powerful, but you may also not find as much information as you would about Bash or ZSH. So once you get a shell, you want to start configuring it. So if you have ever used a shell at all, you know that there's some pretty basic commands you'll probably start using. So this example is to just do stock ls. So ls just lists the files in the current directory you're in. So I wrote this with a program or a tool called a remark, and it's just a JavaScript file that you can include into a HTML file. So this is the files inside of the directory that has my presentation. So it's just the stock ls. There's not a lot of extra information about those files, but then maybe you want to know when they were modified, the size of them. You can also, with the dash F, capital F switch, you can actually see what kind of thing it is. So you can see the slashes here compared to here, you just see the names of things. You can't tell the images is actually a directory. So when you're just starting out, that's the type of thing you would probably want to modify, because typing that all out every time is really annoying. So once we know we want to actually go and modify that, so in this case, using the stock macOS terminal, you get ZSH by default. So if we wanted to add that, we could just open up that ZSHRC file, put an alias in there, and then source it after saving the file. Now we can just run LL and get the same output as before when we had all the options on there. So now we have an LL command we can run, which in this case is an alias. So that's sort of the basics of customizing your shell. And that's probably, I was doing sysadmin work at the time, so LS was I was using it a lot, and it was something I didn't want to type that out every time. So that was probably one of the first things I put into my my Dotfiles. So that's a pretty trivial example. So it's a really easy thing to do. Even if you had to do that on a bunch of different machines, you could just copy and paste that. And as you go, there may be more things you want to customize. So if you're using things like Git or there's all kinds of tools that they use Dotfiles. So once you start down this path, you kind of have a couple of choices. There are pre-made solutions that are like community-driven solutions, I would say, that have a lot of this stuff in them, and have a lot of knowledge from the community sort of packed into one place. So there's for ZSH itself, there's Oh My ZSH, and for Bash, there's something called Bash It, or there's something called Yatter, which is yet another .files repo. So there's plenty more of these. These are just some of the most popular ones that I know of, and these give you a way to sort of just define what sort of plugins you want. So if you want some Git commands or some like basic LS things, you can just get those by default and sort of get years and years of experience from the people who've been using this stuff for years, and get those sort of for free. Although it's not all for free, I would say the caveats of these types of things is that you are beholden to the framework itself. So you can always customize it more, but if you are using one of those plugins and the plugin changes, or you have to update the tool itself to get the latest version, you could run into problems. So with the ease of use comes a lot of uh, not a lot, but there's potential issues you might run into. Another thing is that, like, so with my setup, I've sort of created it by hand over time. And I started doing this before all these frameworks existed. So I've learned a lot just by doing it that way, which is kind of is also pretty valuable. So that's a way to get kind of a head start on a lot of this stuff if you don't want to just be looking through Dotfiles repos on GitHub constantly, or watching videos, or trolling the web for cool little tricks. You can actually get a lot of them from these frameworks. So once you've started building up a much larger configuration, you probably want to get it onto multiple machines. So it's one of the things that sort of drove me to do this, because I was doing sysadmin work on a lot of servers at the time across different operating systems, and anytime I got onto a different server, I wouldn't have my config, so I was way less productive. So I started to figure out a way to get my stuff onto multiple machines. So there's a couple ways you could go about that. You could a very minimal solution is to just put your dot files in a folder, get init that folder, put it up on GitHub or wherever, and then just start checking them out onto different servers. And then to actually put them into place, you could actually use a bash script to, or a Python script or whatever, to put those files into place. So next time you load up your shell, they're ready to go. And actually, this is how I still manage mine, and it mostly works. There are some weird things that are kind of a pain to manage, but I usually just go in and add a new bit to the bash script, and I can just pretty much go to any type of server, run the script, and then I have my setup ready to go. Of course, it's grown a lot of dependencies over the years just because of the things I'm using in Vim or whatever, but it still works pretty well. So I mean, the pros to this is it's simple. There aren't that many dependencies, and I learned how to bash script by doing this as well. Some of the cons to this approach is complex configs, like dealing with some configurations on Linux where they're in a config directory, nested deeper, or like SSH configs, or maybe handling of secrets or things like that. You have to do all that by hand and figure out a way to do it. So it's not always the best. So as with managing your shell files, there's also a way to manage your specific shell. There's a way to manage your all your dot files in general. I haven't used any of these, but they are nice because they have a lot of batteries included. They have more features. It should be less manual work to get started and to actually use it. So that's really nice. I've been given a demo of Yatum, which is yet another Dotfiles manager. There's a trend in naming. People are pretty clever. So that it's really neat. There's ways to have per operating system config files. Because for instance, LS has different switches, whether you're on Mac OS or if you're on Linux. So I have a bunch of like if statements in my config to basically check for that. A tool like Yatum can actually do that, help you do that on a per machine basis or per operating system as well. And these things also, or I guess the cons on these is that when dealing with the configs themselves, you have another framework to deal with. The more frameworks, the more pain. But it's giving you a lot of things out of the box. And some of them, like Dotbot is a Python-based one, so that you have to actually have to make sure you have Python in the system, which is pretty common, but it's not always there. And RCM, I think, is in most of the package managers. So it kind of depends on how you want to do it. And you're also beholden to how they want to do things to a certain extent. You could even use something like Ansible or SaltStack if you want to get crazy. But it's all about what you're comfortable with doing. And it's not just your shell. So we've mostly talked about configuring like ZSH or just your shell. But there's tons of other things you can actually configure. So configuring REPLs for like Python or MySQL or Postgres, things like that. And also just configuring readline itself is a very powerful thing. So you can, so I like to use Vim everywhere. So I try to Vim whatever I can. So I have Vim key bindings in all those REPLs, so I feel at home. There's things like Git. I have a lot of Git aliases that I use almost every day. There's things like editors, obviously like them, but you can also configure VS Code or some other editors that actually will store your configuration on the command line or in a file. And going even further, you could configure your whole operating system. There's a project called Nix, and they have a Nix OS, and they actually can give you the ability to define how your computer is set up completely through configuration files. I've never actually tried it. I've always been intrigued by it, but it's not a step I've taken yet. When I'm on Linux, I actually configure my tiling window manager with called i3 through configuration files. So if I want to add some new shortcut, I just put it in the file and reload, and then I have another shortcut. And there's ways to also configure Homebrew and macOS defaults via command line as well. So there's lots of things you can configure, not just your shell. And my configs have grown a lot over the time, so there's all kinds of stuff in there. So that's pretty much all I had to present on. There's put some links in here to my Dotfiles. There's a GitHub Dotfiles thing created by GitHub that has a bunch of really interesting information, pointers to tutorials, tools, specific repositories, and all kinds of other stuff. There's of course an awesome Dotfiles repo out there with links to all kinds of stuff. And I found this Yatum and Homechick walkthrough that I found pretty interesting. That kind of gets you started bootstrapped on all this stuff. And pretty much the way I configured everything I have is through Google searches and finding other people's configs and taking little bits out of there. So there's tons and tons of stuff on GitHub to go through on that. So that's pretty much all I had.
Cool, thanks.
Awesome.
Do
It was
you want
a
to
really good talk. The presentation was, I thought, was pretty fantastic, just in the format, the way you delivered it. I really like the examples, the way you laid out pros and cons as you went through.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely taken a sort of simplistic approach to it. I've been meaning to try out Yatum and also my ZSH, because I have some plugins installed into my shell, but they're just kind of jammed in at the end of my ZSH RC. So it's always kind of worked, but I have the whole plugin in there, so I haven't been getting any updates for years because I haven't gone and updated it. So, but it works.
You also want to show your shell and some of the specialized things that you've done?
Yeah, sure, I can do it.
Got a question for you while you're pulling it up, and maybe you've got an answer right there in the demonstration. But so you use you put your dot files in GitHub. Do you have any like techniques for managing secrets or private information outside of like git ignore? Because I'm thinking of like AWS CLI uses dot files by default to store your and your SSH keys, for example.
Yep. Yeah. So my sort of workaround for that is typically, actually, I can show you. So in my, let's see. I don't remember where I put it because I did this many years ago. That's a lot of matches. I basically have a file I source that is not checked in, and that way I can just put whatever I need in there, and I just never will check it in.
Got it. So you git ignore one file and have that as a sort of
Actually,
an included dependency.
yeah. So actually, I have it in my.
I've done something like that in some scripts I've written that connect to some of our VoIP servers. Put the keys, the API keys, in a second file that I import.
Oh, I call it extras. That's what it is. So if I look for SSH extras. So basically, in my ZSHRC, I just source this extras file, and then if in my create script, I just create it automatically. And then if I need to put anything like a key or a token or whatever, I can put it in there, and I just basically forget about it. I actually forgot about it the other day, and I was like, "How is this set up?
How does this even work?"
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks.
So the Yatum, the yet another Dotfiles manager, it actually has a way to deal with secrets. So you can actually check them in, and you can use GPG. So you can actually check them in, and you actually push them to GitHub. But the only way to decrypt them is with your GPG key. So you have that on your system anyway. So I think a lot of people will actually do that.
That's pretty cool, because then when you like pull that down on a remote system, you actually bring credentials with you as well, because that's something you'd be missing, right? Otherwise.
And I haven't run into a lot of issues with that. I don't really use AWS CLI that much, so it hasn't really been that big of a problem. But yeah, if I had to do it a lot more, I would certainly be using Yatum, I think, at this point. So yeah, I mentioned I think one of the things I use probably the most is my git config. Since I'm in Git all day, so I have just a ton of aliases in Git, and these have just kind of grown over time. I did some things to make it more like SVN, because that's where I initially learned version control. So things like CO and up. I mean, I made a specific command to do git up, which does a pull dash rebase. But if you have changes, it actually stashes them and then pops them up. So it works exactly like SVN up used to, or still does. So yeah, there's just tons and tons of stuff that I do with that. I'd say that and Tmux and Vim probably my most used configuration files that I use day in and day out. Any specific questions anyone have?
I can throw you a kind of a Tmux question, which is just like be cool to kind of understand your rationale. I've used Tmux for like very specific purposes, like opening a shell on a remote machine that I want to detach from, connect to it later, and reattach that shell. What are some of the reasons why you like to run Tmux even like on your local machine? Like, you go straight into Tmux when you launch a shell? Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, I pretty much open the shell and then go into Tmux. I used to be the same way. I used to only use it or use screen or whatever on a remote machine until a coworker of mine kept prodding me to use it. And finally, I tried it out one day and kind of understood why I would want to do that. And I'd say the biggest reason is basically having different workspaces. So like right here, I'm in my sort of what I call my local workspace, where I have my local shell, my dot files, some other things I'm doing. But then I can actually switch to a different workspace. So I have something for work. I have a couple different work things, and then I have this one. So this is where I was working on the talk. So this is the actual talk here. And so then I go back here. So I have shortcuts to just flip back and forth between workspaces. So if I wanted to edit some dot file or look something up, I could come over here. When I go back here, I'm still exactly where I was in that presentation doing whatever I was there. That's probably the biggest thing I do with it. Another huge thing for me is scroll back. So just create a new terminal. Let's take a forever. So if let's do, just gonna ls to get some stuff on the screen, and maybe readme. So I put some stuff in the buffer, and so now if I want to go back and look at something or copy some text, I can do that all with the keyboard. And I've not found a lot of terminals that do that very well, like searching the scroll back or even like just doing any of that. So I use a tiling window manager on my personal computer, and it's sort of like Tmux the whole thing, right? But I still, when I open up a terminal, I still open up Tmux because the scroll back search and all that is just awful usually. So I do that for a couple of reasons. So I do search. So let's see. Let's see. And so now I have basically Vim key bindings for doing search across my scroll back. I can highlight things and copy it all. So it's just a really powerful.
It's like one of my favorite uses for Tmux yet was actually at a FayettePy meetup when Ryan came to give a talk, and at our where we normally host these at our office, we have an Apple TV hooked up to a projector, and his host OS is, I think, Ubuntu is what he boots into. So he couldn't AirPlay to the Apple TV, and what we ended up doing was there's a spare iMac up at the office that we loaded up a Tmux session on, and then he attached to it remotely, and we streamed from the iMac his Tmux session on his machine so that he could give a talk.
Yeah, the scroll back stuff. And I would say one thing about Tmux and some of the command line tools in general is the defaults are often very poor. I think that's especially true with Tmux, especially if you use Screen at all in the past, and then you try to use Tmux. It's a hard pill to swallow. There's a book by Brian Hogan called Effective Command Line with Tmux or something like that, and he goes through and like sort of walks you through remapping some of the defaults into something more sane. And as soon as I did that, I was like, all right, I get it. This is great. Like, I'm all in. Because a lot of the like the shortcuts for like making splits and stuff were just like random letters that had nothing, like didn't make any semantic sense, any mnemonic sense. It was just didn't make any sense to me. So once I changed it to make more sense, then I use it way more. And same thing like with the scroll back thing, like by default, when you go and copy something, it actually takes you out of it and puts you back at the bottom of the scroll back. I finally got it to a place where I really like it, where see I'm still in it and I can still copy other things, and it doesn't take me back to the beginning until I exit it. So things like that, like I kind of had to figure out over the years, but now it's like I think it works really well.
Which tiling window manager do you use?
I use i3.
I haven't tried it.
It's really nice. I tried out Awesome, I think,
Awesome.
and
I've heard of, yeah.
there's another one I tried, but I like the simplicity of i3, and the configuration is like INI style. Well, it's like even less than INI style. It's just very simple.
Got it.
Whereas with like Awesome, I think you had to do it in Lua or something. Just a lot of extra extraneous stuff to know.
I live my life mostly on Windows machines at the moment. So, and hadn't ever really considered getting an alternate shell. So I'm doing some Googling now, but do you have any experience with that or any suggestions?
A little bit. So actually, Windows has done some things in the recent past that make this a lot easier. So you can actually run Linux inside of Windows now. It's called Windows Subsystem for Linux, and you can actually access all the things. I think they just released something in Windows 10, I believe, that gives you more integration with the underlying operating system. So you could actually just do all these things I just showed off in a Ubuntu Linux subsystem for Linux. I don't know what they call them, container, whatever.
They do have containers as a thing on for them as well. But yeah, I just installed that Linux subsystem.
Yeah, it's really neat. Like I've played around with it a little bit. It's actually really powerful, and they keep making it closer and closer to the base OS. So the two of them are like, I think they actually just announced that you can run Linux GUI apps in Windows with that system, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, they were doing a bunch of new stuff this week, releasing new things.
Yep. So so outside of that, the story on Windows has been fraught with peril, I would say, because doing these things not in a VM, you'd have to install Cygwin or whatever the flavor that is these days, and that's it. It gets you most of the way there, but not quite. But I think they've come a long way since then. I think they even introduced a new terminal as well in this recent set of releases. So yeah, they've come a long way. And as you can tell, I can blab on about this stuff for many hours.
That's awesome. Is any other questions from anybody? Cool. Well, Clayton, thanks for coming to present to us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Small virtual audience, but we'll have this up on YouTube as well,
Awesome.
on our YouTube channel for the group. So, Chrissy, I know you had talked about maybe doing a little bit of a Dotfile swap. I don't know if you had something planned for that. I didn't come prepared with Dotfiles
really.
to swap. I was going to chat with everybody. I was going to go evangelize about Z Shell, but Clayton had it handled. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was funny. You mentioned Calvin giving you ZSH, and he said just recently, I said, I use ZSH because that's what Clayton used. And he said, yeah, me too.
Well, Calvin uses my actual Dotfiles repo wholesale somehow. I don't know how it works. I mean, I guess we're brothers, so I guess it makes sense. But he's always like, "Oh yeah, you added that new thing. That's cool." I'm like, "Do what?" So he's just still using it. Because I think in my README I say I would strongly urge you not to use these.
People don't read the README, man.
True.
Especially not Calvin.
That's very true.
Yeah, Casey, I think you've met Calvin. He popped into one of these meetups, one or two of these.
Okay.
He's our CTO.
Yeah, I hadn't put that all together, but that makes sense.
Yep, that's my brother. So he got me started in all this stuff. And now I lead him in all the Dotfile stuff because I got way more crazy about it than he did.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to show on mine. Nothing special. I mean, I use like the Git, like you can see on Clayton's there, showing which branch you're on, how many changes you have locally. I can't live without that now. If I don't have it, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, I will end up not pushing something because I didn't realize it's not up on the master yet.
I haven't gotten around to putting my files back in Git. A long time ago, I had them there, or I had them in Bitbucket, I think. But I really need to, and I don't have anything to show because when I started working from home during like social distancing, I got a Mac Mini and set it up for my home computer. So I'm running without my typical dot files. But instead of, I obviously I could go get my laptop and copy it over, but I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to maybe start with a clean slate and redo it. And I just haven't been able to convince myself to like open Pandora's box and try and dive in, because I've thought about like trying to manager and just like rethink everything, because my dot files are not well maintained. They're very rickety, and it's like I know which parts of the floor you'll fall through if you step on them, you know? Or like someone will, like when I have my laptop out and they'll watch me in my shell or something, and I'll just be like, ignore all that. That's business as usual, and it's just some pile of warnings from like, oh yeah, I've got power bar, but it's messed up, something with a font, and I just keep going, but yeah, so I've been wanting to clean it out, but I don't have anything set up. I'm running this. At least the new Mac OS uses ZSH by default, so that's been a little bit better than like running totally blind. But
yeah, I used to be that way with my Vim configuration. I had all my plugins in the repo itself, and finally I used a thing called Vim plug to actually automate it all, and it was quite a breath of fresh air to do that, because I would never update anything because it was too much of a pain. So that was one case where using a framework or using something to automate it more made my life much easier and hasn't really been much of a pain at all.
Awesome, makes sense.
Yeah, so the one link I put at the end, and I'll send these slides out to you guys, is the Yatum and Homeschick thing. I think that is probably something I would look at to, if I was going to go do this tomorrow. It's something I would look at. It looked like he had just updated that recently.
Sweet. Well, thanks a lot, Clayton.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I don't know, Chrissy, if we have any announcements for this one. Unknown as to whether or not our event next month is going to be in person. It's seeming more likely, but still not a certainty at this point. So,
would it be possible?
Say what?
Sorry. Would it be possible to stream it, even if it is in person?
It's kind of what I thought about. Taking the exact same approach that we've taken to reopening the office for the company too, which is like it's there if you want it, but also social distance to your comfort level. And so I've thought about that as like our next couple of live events, whenever they are, if we start them in June, I'm actually having the presenter present through Zoom, and putting that up on the screen in the office, but so that people can remotely join it. And we'll get some of our podcast equipment out so we can mic it. We've had some success with that in the past so that we get pretty good audio for everybody. So that's what I'm thinking is whenever it is, whether it's June or maybe it's July or August, but whenever we start doing in-person events again, go ahead and streaming them, so that everybody can kind of interact at whatever level, they feel is necessary for themselves. I think that's the best way to handle it.
Cool.
Plus Clayton can join us if we do that. So.
And I don't have anything lined up coming up, so I need to work on that. I mean, I think it'd almost be kind of nice when we can meet in person to just do a social event.
I know, right? Just to see real human beings again that aren't like, don't have compression artifacts on their face. Yeah, that would be fun. We haven't done one of those in a while.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah, so maybe I'll see. Yeah, I'll start working on getting things lined up and maybe see in a couple of weeks what things are looking like.
I've got a talk that I'm supposed to do for the JavaScript meetup group that's actually not really that language centric. It's about a framework that you implement with JS, but I could very easily pivot it to a Python talk. So I could do a double header. Do FayettePy one week and JS the next on performant mapping in the browser with DexGL as the topic. So. Oh wait, what am I talking about? Tyrell just gave that talk. Almost exactly. He ended up talking about that a lot in his last one. It would be too much overlap. Never mind. Abort.
Never mind. What's the JavaScript meetup next week? I was trying to go look that up because I thought it's something interesting. I thought
He's got there's lightning talks 1 month. That might be June. I don't know what the next week one was. I haven't seen Blake in a long time.
Yeah,
I'm glad to know. I saw him asking about speakers for the JS meetup, and I was happy. I was like, good, Blake's still alive. Nobody's been checking in with him.
I need to try to keep up with the podcasts. Are you guys keeping up with production on those?
Kind of. Admittedly, we missed 2 weeks ago. We just couldn't get it put together. So in almost 2 years, that's like, I think the second time that we just didn't produce an episode for a week. And then just with, I don't know what it is. I mean, honestly, it seems like everyone's working from home. I feel like I have more time than ever, but I just keep getting pulled onto stuff. And so we haven't been getting them out on Fridays lately. They've coming out over the weekend instead of on Fridays, which I don't think people mind, but the title of the show does imply that it comes out on Fridays. So yeah, they're still doing, in fact, I'm so glad you brought it up, Wayman, because if I want to get back on track, I got to edit an episode tonight because we recorded one last week, but it has not been cut yet. So I'm going to do that right now. As soon as we get off this call, I'm going to cut an episode, schedule it. It's going to come out at noon tomorrow. Like, we know what we're doing.
I didn't know you guys edited yours.
Yeah, that's true. No, you're 100% correct. That's actually one of the most fun running gags of the show. Is like when something happens and then we say, no, this is the part where we say we'll edit that in post, and then we don't.
I think you guys were talking
it's
about
like
that.
It's minimal editing. There's it's a little bit of audio engineering to clean up the audio and kind of normalize, especially with everyone on Zoom calls right now. Getting everyone the same volume. You got to compress it. Well, actually, we limit it and then compress it a little bit, and then some EQ, and then we have a intro, outro music that has to be smashed onto the ends, and that's about all the editing there is to it. So there's no excuse. It really only takes about 10 minutes to cut an episode, and still we've been cutting them like 2 days late. Actually, the hardest part. A link. I'll give you back. Wayman, you came on an episode with us once, right?
Yeah, I invited myself
no,
over
it was
to
good.
your office for today.
But did you stick around for an intro recording at the end of it?
I think you guys nailed it
on the first try.
First shot,
that never happened. Usually, what we do, the format for the show, after we record an episode, we then fire the mics back up for another 20 to 30 minutes and record more content where we come up with intros for the episode. And then we release that content to patrons on Patreon. So that's some extra content they get. And that's actually the hardest part of editing an episode is when we get going on that. And there's like one good intro take somewhere. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. There's 40 minutes of audio and there's like 3 seconds of it that you have to go pluck out. You have to find it and remember when and you can't scrub it. You're just like clicking through audio. And it's just like, you'll never check it. So you end up having to listen to the full 40 minutes to find what you're looking for. And so that's what ends up putting back the episode production is like, I don't have time to sit there and find that intro. So we might come up with a better way for that. If we had a proper producer, they could just like write down the timestamp of when the cut was and we could go to it. So
Yeah.
if anybody wants to produce podcast episodes for free, let me know. We have a vacancy for that position.
I posted the link to the JavaScript meetup. Ryan is talking next week, Ryan Hybert.
Next week.
It doesn't look like it's JavaScript specific, so that might be interesting.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Have a good Thursday night.
You guys too.
Yeah,
Happy
thanks for
have a
having
good
me.
weekend.
Yeah, you guys too. Happy Memorial Day.
Oh, if you guys know where to get like UVC spectrum LEDs, like let me know.
If we were to like just find ourselves.
Yeah, if you happen to know, trying to make a little sterilization chamber at the house.
That's not something I've looked into.
The UVC, those puppies are expensive.
And probably very rare right now.
Yeah. Everyone's like, "Oh, this is a hot item."
Yeah.
Highest demand right now.
Yeah, no, I don't have an LED guy that I
Yeah.
can put you in touch with. I got a hand sanitizer guy I can put you in touch with.
Oh, yeah. Have you guys?
I know someone that's been distilling their own alcohol to make hand sanitizer. So
I've been
bootleg
encountering
moonshine hand sanitizer
out there that smells like tequila. Have you guys encountered any tequila scented ones?
I have one. It's not. I don't know if it's scented, but we just got one. We finally found some. We bought like a gallon because we were going to fill some up to keep at the office for when we do reopen. And I forget where you get it, but it's some supplier that popped up overnight. And it's clearly not as refined as other hand sanitizers, and it smells like cheap gin. And it's kind of awful. Like it's alcohol, but it's got that kind of juniper. I don't know if you're a gin drinker, but it doesn't smell like gin. It smells like the day after gin is how I would describe it. It smells like the way the world smells if you like black out on gin martinis. It's just like, it's so unsettling, the smell. Like, oh, I know it. It's just like really like jet fuel mixed with like sassafras and juniper and dirt. I don't know. It's clearly not the same kind of refined, but it works. I'm sure it does the job.
Well,
Tequila scented sounds
I'm
different.
Peace out.
yeah.
Thanks for
All
having
right,
me.
leaving for real now.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.